am a sex therapist. I'm a certified sex therapist by the American Academy of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. It's ASECT. And I have a private practice in Portland, Oregon, and I work primarily with individuals and people in various relationship structures around sexuality, how to improve their sexual connections, if they are dealing with any sorts of sexual challenges in terms of functioning, issues of desire or interest, difficulties with orgasm. I work with people around improving what those conditions or challenges are for them in hopes that they have the sexual relationship that they want to have.
Absolutely. Out of curiosity, are there any recurrent themes or patterns or issues that you think are the basis for many sexual dysfunctions or issues?
Yes, I do. I believe that how many of us in this culture come up in terms of our sexual development is through the lens of how do I please my partner? Like 20 moves to turn him on. And that creates so many difficulties. One, just spectatoring, where I'm observing myself or self-conscious about myself, wondering if I'm doing it right, wondering how they're feeling about the sex that we're having. And it also keeps us away from really developing, I feel like, our sense of self and what feels good to us, what is important for us, what are the things that we find really important in a sexual encounter. And so I do believe that that is one of the basis of many sexual challenges. And if we were to really start focusing more so on how do I turn myself on, what are the elements in a sexual encounter that I need to feel present in order to have pleasure and connection, and to pursue that unapologetically, then I think we would be in a better place. And again, not to engage in consent violations or not to not attend to our partners. But if we were pursuing more of ourselves, I think we would be in better shape.
It's interesting that you say that, because when you point that out, of course, many of us can think of extreme and multiple examples of, like you said, 20 ways to please this person or your partner or whatever the case is. And then the people who seem to be a little bit more focused on their pleasure and making sure they get their pleasure, and maybe even helping others find their pleasure, those people tend to face a lot of societal consequences for that. Even like the models bringing it to Live Jasmine, they face a lot of stigma just for working on the platform and the site itself. And sometimes I wonder if it's because these are women who have taken control of their pleasure and they're helping other people find theirs.
Yes. Well, women get it. The expectation is that people with penises are men, they're entitled to it. It's their right. But if women were to pursue their own pleasure unapologetically, then we'd all be whores, or and being a whore is lovely. the negative connotations with it aren't so much. But yeah, it's just women would have too much power. They would have too much agency. It's too threatening.
Well, and that's what I wanted to ask you next is, why do you think, and I think you just shared a little bit of what that is, but why do you think there are systems set in place to make women so uncomfortable about really owning and claiming their sexuality? And when they do, they are, labeled this, that, and the other.
Yeah. What purpose would men serve in some ways? I feel like it's the shaming of women and their agency and owning their sexuality is because it's in direct conflict with the patriarchy and just all of the societal systems that exist to obtain and maintain power and control. Like where if women have too much power or women have too much agency or do know too much about their sexual selves, then what will happen to the fabric of society? If women were to own even their reproductive rights, what would happen to the fabric of society? Women are seen as, I think, what this culture or society thinks is most important in terms of like the family and the limited view of what family is. Our antiquated systems of marriage, or they're not so relevant anymore in terms of economics. I mean, it was an economic arrangement and a paternity arrangement to ensure that people weren't taking care of anybody else's children.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And we're actually starting, I think, to see these shifts in society where that traditional marriage is not as desired as it once was. People are leaning a lot more towards open relationships or polyamory or this and that, because like you said, you know, originally it is true that marriage was established for survival. And it's much easier to survive now just because of the updated society we live in. So we actually do not need marriage for survival anymore. Now it's just, do you want that? Because if you do, by all means, but it's not something that's needed. And also to one of your other points, you know, there's this story that I've been told is based off of a true story, but I know it's in a really old play of women that come together in a little tribe or whatever it was at the time, and there was a war going on, and so they decided we need to stop the war. So all of the women in the tribe made a pact that they would not have sex with their husbands, their boy. No one was getting sex until the war ended, and the war ended. So there is a lot of power in female sexuality, and yeah, there are. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, I think that I've heard that too.
From your perspective and your experience, what are some of the direct benefits of really diving into our sexual health or exploring ourselves? Because I feel like one of the main things that I see in my life and certainly through the lens of the platform, many members come onto Live Jasmine because they have a fantasy that they are too afraid to share with a partner, but they still kind of want to experience it or try to and see, do I like that? Or no, I'm actually never doing that again. I'm not interested in that. But so many of us in general, I think that we just don't know ourselves. Like we're not encouraged to explore or go there. And I'm curious, what are some of the benefits that come along with, you know, figuring ourselves out sexually and beyond the normal like confines of marriage, which is what is taught is the right way to explore?
Right. I feel like one of the biggest benefits of taking the time and giving yourself permission to explore yourself sexually is to be an embodied person, you know, to not be living our life in sort of a dissociated state where we have to disconnect from these parts of ourselves. We don't get to choose our sexuality. You know, we don't get to choose what it is that we're into or what we find to be sexually relevant or even what our fantasies are. We certainly get to control what we do with them. And I feel like a lot of doors are closed to our sexual fantasies because it does not quite fit into more of these moralistic ideas or definitions about what is acceptable in sex, who can have sex, how sex can take place. And one of my favorite part of the work that I do is really helping people get clear about what are their sexual health principles. And this is well beyond pregnancy or protecting themselves against sexually transmitted infections. This is, how do I live into my sexual self with honesty, being honest with myself, being honest with my partners, making sure that there's consent, of course, that I'm prioritizing mutual pleasure, that I'm not exploiting anyone for my own sexual gain or gratification, that and once people really get clear about what their values are, then they get to get curious about their behavior, their sexual behavior. And if your sexual behavior is relatively in line with your sexual health principles, then why wouldn't you pursue that? If I am pursuing a fantasy and everyone's there consensually, I'm not exploiting anyone, we're being safe, we're taking care of our health, we're concerned about mutual pleasure, we're being honest about what we want, we have shared meaning, we're both doing this, and we have some shared meaning around what it is that we're doing, then really our sexual exploration can be limitless. So, and when I see people get really clear about their principles and notice that their behaviors are generally in line with their principles, I get to witness people just living so much more fully into themselves. People's mental health improves. People find more joy and pleasure in their life. People are more embodied and more connected to just the experience of pleasure, not only their sexual pleasure, but just all of the pleasure that I think exists in life. There are clear benefits, and watching the transformation is really quite lovely, especially with people who may have some sexual conflicts about, this thing that I'm really interested in is out of line with what my culture or my religion tell me is okay. And so helping people get really clear on, that may have been what was planted in my garden, but is that really what is true for me? Like even like shared values being one of those sexual health principles. I am going to have a conversation with my sexual partner about what this means to them. If I am not interested in a committed monogamous relationship, I'm going to let my sexual partner know, hey, I would love to be sexual with you, and I'm interested in exploration and having some fun and lots of pleasure. But this does not mean that I want to have a committed monogamous relationship with you. How is that for you? Like just getting really clear about what this means to me. If I am looking for a monogamous partner and I'm being sexual with somebody who's made that very clear to me, we don't have shared meaning or shared values there, and it can be a really good way for me to say like, oh, actually this person is not a good sexual partner for me. Right. So I feel like that's one concrete way, just getting curious about what does this mean to me? What does the sexual experience mean to me? And if we don't share enough meaning, then perhaps we shouldn't do it. I mean, I think about connection in terms of attachment to other humans, and we can't survive without it. And people have different thresholds for what it is that they need. And I think that people who say, yeah, having like a deep connection with somebody isn't really a requirement for me, say in a sexual context, like that's fine. Like I believe them. It may not be, but it doesn't mean that. Well, I would get curious about why is that? Is that part of like a deeper, persistent pattern of protection, just in terms of safekeeping of themselves. because to really connect with someone sexually, you fall into the depths of emotional and erotic intimacy, and that can be scary for some. So I think it's crucial for our survival, connection. And it looks so many, it's so varied what connection actually looks like. But I don't know how well any of us really do without it. I don't know if I could even begin to quantify the amounts because we're also finding connection in such interesting ways. Like people who are like digisexual, who want to experience most of their sexuality through an online platform, like they are still in connection with another person, even if they're not seeing them or touching them or smelling them. So I think we're getting a lot more flexible with what connection means and what it looks like. Yeah.
Digisexual. I have not heard that term yet.
Mm-hmm.
Digisexual, interesting. So, just for those who, like me, haven't heard it, what exactly does that mean?
A digisexual. I wanted to get the name of the person who speaks a lot about this. But really, it's a person who primarily experiences their sexuality in forms like, through chats or through video or some sort of online situation like games or, there's lots of ways that we connect with people in the digital world. But I think really, maybe my understanding of what it is that is sort of the method and means of which a person really experiences their sexuality. That's their mode of exploring themselves sexually.
I think probably camming would fall under that.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. Yes.
Camming is interesting because I think many members, I mean, people have different reasons for coming to cam sites, but many members either they have a disability and they're not able to have a very mobile social life, but they still need the intimacy and connection. Other people maybe went through a nasty divorce and they just don't want the drama of a relationship, but they still want connection. But I'm curious your thoughts on camming. Do you think that people initially go to these sites just for a sexual experience? Is that what it's all about? Or do you think that even maybe unknown to them fully, there's a deeper reason?
Connection. I think, yeah, maybe it is maybe what a person can really identify as their motivator is, ooh, I want to have a sexual experience. And I want to have a sexual experience with this person and engage in this fantasy or but I think it's all about connection. I want to connect with this person in this way and to be able to experience my sexuality, or to share my sexuality with another human.
Mm.
I don't, that's what I hear from my clients. It's another way of just being able to experience themselves and to share their sexuality in a way that feels accessible to them.
Yeah, I wanted to ask what have like the clients that you may have that do engage in camming, first and foremost, what are your thoughts on camming and the role it can play for them?
Mm-hmm.
And what have your clients said about it?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think camming, my thoughts on camming, I think it can be a wonderful resource for people. What I have heard from my clients is, I I think it's been it can be a place of like sexual freedom and healing in some aspects, to be able to interact with this person where there's this clear exchange. The rules are really well known. There can be a lot of freedom in that container that exists. Um, Freedom to explore, to engage in a fantasy, to allow myself to think or feel something that I may not allow myself to feel in other parts of my life. The acceptance that my clients report feeling, like this person is just with me, and it feels like a lot of barriers are removed for them. And so I feel like with folks that I know that have used camming, it's been a really positive experience for them.
Yes, that's definitely also what I've heard from members who I've interviewed is part of it is that they feel seen or heard or understood, because the experience is designed to be positive.
Mm-hmm.
It would
Mm-hmm.
something would have to go wrong for it not to be positive for the member.
Yes.
So whatever it is that they've been lacking or needing in their life, they usually draw it out in that experience and feel very healed by that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, they do. Yeah. And, I think like going back to the container, like, um, it's like people going to see a therapist, that is not a relationship of reciprocity, right? When people come to work with me, I am there to take care of them. They are not there to take care of me. I can imagine, like, in that realm, like, of course, I hope everybody takes care of themselves. Like, I take care of myself by having boundaries and following my ethics. And I would imagine that that's really important for people who engage in camming as well, to have their boundaries, and to communicate them and to respect them. So it's not like the Wild West or anything, but the relationship is known. It's really clear, and there's so much freedom in that.
I agree with you completely because, I feel like in this day and age, many relationships, it's more rare that there's a relationship that is so clearly defined, like maybe a family member or a very defined partner. Most of the time, there's a lot of room for ambiguity and like questioning. And is this how they feel? Or is this what this is? But you're right. When we have these containers where we're very clear on what it is and what it is not, there's a lot of freedom and safety and feeling good about that. Whereas, even a random example, someone meets a person at a bar or club and they go home and have an interaction, and then one person's wondering what this means, the other one doesn't care to ever talk again. um, there's a lot of like questioning that is going to lead to not feeling good or safe.
Mm-hmm.
At the start of our call, you mentioned that you have seen and found that people not going after and seeking their own pleasure is one of the foundational issues in their sexual wellness, and being trained more towards focusing on the partner's pleasure and leaving themselves out more. I'm assuming that that's something that you see more in women than men, or is it in both?
Mm, I do see it in both. I think that it is fair to say that I see it perhaps a little bit more in women than I do in men. But I've worked with plenty of men where that is true as well. And I think it shows up more so for men in terms of their sexual functioning. If they're having problems obtaining or maintaining erections, or delayed ejaculation, or I think it's because they are pretty disconnected from what it is that's happening in their bodies, and they are too focused on what's happening with their partner. We're worried about disappointing them or not satisfying them, or And so helping men become more embodied and more connected to themselves is usually pretty helpful in that work. And the same is true for women. You know, if you were to stop thinking about what your partner needs and start thinking about what you need, you might notice a big shift in the way you experience your sexuality with one another. I don't know who said it, but somebody is like the best lovers are the most selfish lovers. Um, and it's because you don't have to worry. Like, are they enjoying it? Will they act on their own behalf? Will they say no if they need to say no? And there's, again, just a lot of freedom in that, knowing that my partner is going to take care of themselves and they're going to let me know if I need to do something different.
Absolutely. And I think it kind of comes down to that, old saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you're a selfish lover and your cup is full, you'll naturally, once your cup is full, be more giving. That is just like the nature of things. But if you're kind of depleted or you don't know yourself sexually or your cup's not full, it's going to be very hard for you to give from that empty cup. So, yeah.
Yeah, it'll just become performative. Um, yeah.
Which again, if you're connected with someone, they'll be able to feel that.
Yes.
Is there anything about the space in sexual wellness and sexual health and sex positivity that we haven't talked about, but that you wish people would understand more?
Mm, yes. Yes. The absence of spontaneous sexual desire or horniness does not mean that something is wrong with you. Um, that people, if people waited to act to be sexual, based upon the cues that they were getting within their bodies or their feelings of horniness or desire, there's some people who would never, ever, ever engage in sex. And so I think that that's such an important message for people to get, is that we can experience our desire to be sexual in terms of spontaneous. It's like our desire for sex just falls out of the sky. But we can also really experience our desire from a place of responsiveness, where if we allow ourselves to get into a sexual context because we've had good times, it's probably going to be fun. There are usually good outcomes. Then I'm going to be willing to put myself in the position to be sexual and then to become responsive. And I feel like if people really had that grasp, they would have so much more compassion and grace for themselves. And it wouldn't be the beginning of a lot of negative messaging of like, I'm wrong, there's something wrong with me, I'm broken because I don't want to have sex all the time.
Yeah, I think that is important and really well said. Absolutely. How do we create a more sexually healthy society? What are our next steps with that?
We need to start talking about it. And we need to start talking about it with children when children are young in ways that are developmentally appropriate. And if we could all nurture a culture where we accept that sexuality is part of life, that there's a lot of joy and pleasure to be had in sexuality, that we knew from an early age that maybe not then, but at some point, like that people do engage in being sexual and that's a normal part of life. And there are things that we can do to keep ourselves safe, or even just being more open and welcoming to pleasure, like just talking about our pursuits of pleasure, even outside of the sexual realm. I think that would be pretty revolutionary. We would all have a language, we would all have words, it would all be normal. It wouldn't be so scary and overwhelming or secret or shameful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very well said. Thank you. I love that. Just let's all focus on our pleasure. Why are
Right.
we so obsessed with our pain and our trauma, and I get it. We need to go there too, but we don't focus on the pleasure enough. We focus
Right.
on other things. I agree.
Right. Like those present moments, those moments of joy, like the warmth of tea in our hands, or the first smell of coffee, or the way we feel in our beds when we're tucked in and going to sleep, or the snoring of our dogs. Like there's so much pleasure and delight to be had in this world.
Sure, you just named some of my favorite things, down to the snoring of my dog. Yeah, it's like I love when I hear my dog snoring. I don't know what it is.
I love it. It's like one of my favorite things.
Me too. Me too. I absolutely love hearing it. It's like just knowing that they're so cozy or something, that they're so comfortable and so at peace. It's just heartwarming. I don't know.
Yes. Yes.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was great to meet you.
Yes, you as well.